Yeah, thank you, Robert, and what a joy to be back speaking into Scotland again. I do understand I'm currently writing another book, and I did invite the lady Fiona, who's helping me with that, to join in today. So hopefully, Fiona, you're there as well. This topic this morning is discovering your talents and building your well-being. Is something which is, of course, really dear to my heart. I don't think I've ever spoken to Scottish people before about growing your talents, but it is something which has a direct link with well-being. And so I'm going to start this morning from there. One of the things I always think with a situation like this is that I get a real buzz when I talk to people who have got something in common with me. This morning, if I think about it, I rather suspect that everyone that's on this is passionate about agriculture, and that's global passion, because I think that's what exists today, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. The second thing, we've probably all had a gutful of COVID, and I rather suspect we've got a wee way to go with that, maybe several years, but we'll slowly learn how to cope with that, get on with it. And then the third thing that we all have in common this morning is, it's this morning here, sorry, it's evening over there. It's pouring with rain outside my house here in Blenheim in New Zealand. It's still dark, and it's morning time, but of course for you it's last night. I wonder if I could time travel back to a younger man. That would be great. But anyway, the third thing that I think we've all got in common is neither you nor I have got a clue what I'm going to say this evening. So let's get started. Talents. Back in California, there's a place called Death Valley. It doesn't hardly ever rain there, and that's why it's called Death Valley. It's extremely dry, no life, just nothing. But in 2004, in Death Valley, they got 7 inches of rain, and hadn't been seen for generations. The whole place just came alive. Interesting, isn't it? There was one ingredient missing in Death Valley. And Death Valley went through a full cycle: flowers grew, pollinated, seeded, and then it didn't rain and hasn't rained again since. That's kind of what I see in the world with people. People live their daily lives, and so often there is one thing that they don't understand to make their life grow more. The guy that you're listening to, Doug Avery, lived 5 years of his life like Death Valley. I suffered depression. And so I got a really first take of what it's like to have that life not happening. I hope in the next 50 minutes that I can reach out to you and help you discover your talents. I want to give you a couple more examples, and these came from a person who was born in Britain, Sir Ken Robinson, and he was asked to interview Sir Paul McCartney from the Beatles. And he said to Sir Paul, where did you go to school? And Sir Paul said, I went to school in Liverpool. He said, oh, so did I. And he said, when you went to school, did you do music? And he said, yes, I did. He said, I did music the whole time I was at school. And he said, and did your music teacher recognize your unbelievably exceptional talents? And he said, no, he didn't. He thought I was pretty average. And Sir Paul went on to say, actually, George Harrison, he went to school at the same place. He was 2 years younger than me, and he did music too. And Sir Ken said to him, did he think he was any good at music? And he said, no, he thought he was pretty average as well. Here's a teacher in the mid-50s with 2 of the Beatles, arguably the greatest musicians in modern times. and he missed their talent. Isn't it amazing? You know, like here was two guys who clearly had musical talent beyond belief, and their professional music teacher missed it. And in our lives, I think that goes on all the time. Just totally missed. Elvis Presley went to school in Tombstone, Mississippi. At the school he went to, there was a club called the Glee Club. The Glee Club was focused on producing musical productions. Elvis desperately wanted to join, but the Glee Club wouldn't let him in because they thought he might spoil their sound. We all know how great the Glee Club became known around the world. Incredible, isn't it? And, you know, in my recent times, since I've become incredibly interested in the well-being of humanity, I constantly become aware of the fact that human beings, and it will apply to you out there, all of you, will have talents that have yet to be exposed. I look at talents as being like precious minerals. They're often deeply buried. And so one of the most important things to me with well-being is to discover yourself, not only discover the tools to manage the harder times of life, but also just to discover the talents that have not yet been recognized within yourself. The place I nearly always go to talk about this is neuroplasticity. It's a big word and it's hard to say, but if you Google it, neuro meaning of the brain and plasticity meaning of the ability to mold and grow. We live and learn in a world where our incoming information comes through our eyes, through our ears, through our nose, through our taste, through our touch. And as we have these experiences in our life, the entry point into our brain is through a thing called the amygdala. And I like to simplify things down in my country fashion. The amygdala is like a drafting gate in a sheep race. It decides which part of the brain the information will go to. But the brain is a very lazy thing if it's allowed to be, just like muscles. If we want to sit on the couch all day, our muscles degenerate and become pretty worthless. So does our brains. So when information's received into our brain, if you're a negative kind of thinking person, those messages will go to the back part of the brain. I don't know what it's called. It doesn't really matter. But the back part's the dark place. It's where bad thoughts are processed, where we deal with the really tough stuff. And if it's bad enough, and if you think badly enough for long enough, you'll start producing the chemicals that make your life really miserable. Those chemicals are incredibly strong. Like any sort of highway or roadway, if you and your negative thinking kind of life pattern says, oh, you know, I'm the sort of person that every time something happens, I'll always fail. Well, that roadway is the easy road to travel, and every bit of information you'll get, you'll probably think, well, you know, like, okay, I've just found I've won $20, but somebody will take $19.50 off me. That's the way you think. All the information will go there. And like a highway in your countryside or whatever, the one that's the big one that gets used the most is the easiest one to travel. So your brain automatically does that. I live in the game of, and spend most of my life turning people around to re-examine their lives so that they can start to see more opportunity. They can start to develop more treasure in their life, if you take what I mean. So for that, you've got to start working with somebody to have a more optimistic view of how things can go. When they do that, it's really hard to start with for somebody who's traveling really poorly, because this open road to the bad place is just hanging there to take the information. So you've got to push through and start sending information to this bit up here, which is the prefrontal cortex. Remember the times in your life when you felt special or loved, or an event happened that was just better than you've ever experienced. You feel this great warmth coming down through your body. That's the good juices from the prefrontal cortex working. And what actually happens with neuroplasticity, and neuroscientists have proved this, we used to think that a human brain was fully developed at about 18 to 24, and then slowly deteriorated for the rest of your life. I'm a living example of neuroplasticity on steroids. My life really didn't come awake till about 20 years ago, and the knowledge and the growth that I've had in more recent years is greater than any other time in my life. I'm a living example of a brain that lit up and hopefully will never, ever die off again. So once you start having a more positive disposition into the world, you will give that other road more traffic. Your amygdala will start to say, well, I think this is worthy of going to the front part of your brain, and it will send it there. And like all things, the more that road gets used, the easier it is to travel. That's a pretty crude description of this. And if you go onto Google and Google neuroplasticity, there's a little blue icon that comes up there. It'll explain it really nicely for you in a little graphic that plays for about 2 or 3 minutes. So neuroplasticity is really important. It creates the process where you can start to develop this wonderful brain. But of course, if you haven't got more substance to it than that, if you haven't got some sort of vision, well, then you won't be able to trick yourself into doing that. So that actually means to me that you have to have an energy reason to start feeling positive. And that can be really hard. For me, turning myself from 5 years of depression into a new life form that wanted to grow, wanted to live, wanted to be that happy person, took an incredible amount of energy at the start. It takes 21 days of concentration to change a mindset. That kind of change, if you are in a bad place, will be unachievable on your own. That's why Doug Avery passionately advocates mentoring. And so to have some sort of vision or hope is the place to start. Prior to COVID, most of my work was done with rural people. And that was where I was pretty much 100% located. When COVID came along here in New Zealand, we locked down. Rural people were called essential workers, so they were encouraged to carry on, but just work within the confines of your farm. And a lot of our urban folk experienced what I call their first drought. They got an experience like I'd had, where the money pump, the purpose pump in their life dried off. And in no time at all, I was taking lots of calls from people who had never, ever experienced this kind of shut off. This job or lifestyle that they had was suddenly under terrible threat. And it was a great joy to me, because I know personally that myself, that if you can intervene in a breaking mind, you can turn that person back to fruitful thoughts in a very quick time. You can turn them away from going through that hellhole that I went through for 5 years with a very minimal amount of work. It was a really interesting time for me, because I was swamped for a period of time, and instead of me doing the sort of stuff like I'm doing this morning, and a lot of conference speaking and traveling and a lot of exciting stuff, I was suddenly confronted with a lot of broken people, and they all pretty much had 100% the same story. So it was pretty boring sort of work, but I was getting satisfaction out of helping them to reformat themselves to cope with the process. During that time, I started to ask the question, what have all these people got? What is the simple language that I could put around this process? There were people that were locking down with their wife or husband, and they'd never been confined to just the two of them before, and their relationship wasn't too flash beforehand, and it got a whole lot worse. I call that amplification. The pressure from being shut down on lower income, a lot of uncertainty, allowed the amplification of very negative thoughts. On the other side of that, if I take my wife and myself, we actually found our lockdown together as being amplifying in the other way. Our relationship grew. And it was kind of this whole process for a guy with a mindset like mine, which is intrigued by human beings' behavior. I started this massive search. What is it? What is it that people that are doing really well, what have they got? And the ones that are doing really poorly, what have they got? And I came up with my 4 pillars of well-being. And they are this: love, connection, purpose, and hope. I found for myself, my love for my wife grew. And that was great because we actually experienced times there where we'd never, ever had so much time just to enjoy bits and pieces of our wholeness that we'd never had before. But I also experienced people arriving here and even though they were supposed to be locked down, their relationship had broken. And that was a calamitous situation for them. Connection is one of the most needed processes of humanity. And before this thing started, before I started this morning, I was talking to Robert and I said to him that New Zealand's been out of lockdown for a long time, but everywhere I go, far more people greet each other with a hug. That's probably not brilliant in a COVID world, but in our world, which currently has none, a lot more Kiwis are hugging each other because we experienced that time where we were disconnected from each other. A sense of purpose is absolutely vital in the world. And to me, that became my salvation. When one day, a university professor painted a picture in my mind of how I could improve myself, I didn't need any more. I didn't have all the ideas of how to go about the new journey I was about to go on. I just knew that there was hope. I just knew that if I became purposeful again, there was hope. So people that turned up to me that may have had a loss of love, of separation with their partner, if they still had a job to go to where they were connected with people, they would still have purpose and they would still have hope. Those 4 things can cope. A human being can cope with one of those 4 things gone. Sometimes when human beings have an accident and they lose a limb or something like that and they've got to reinvent their life, initially they'll probably lose a sense of hope. But if they're still loved and connected to good people, those people will help build them back a new vision which can recreate their hope. It's a pretty straightforward sort of business. And if you're really passionate about the world, and I'm sure you all are, and if you're really keen to advance and grow your own capabilities and tools around well-being, think about love, connection, purpose, and hope. How can I fortify these things within myself? Do I take any of these things for granted? My story's pretty well known all over the world. We got our farm back going together, which back excelling. Went on to win South Island Farmer of the Year, went on to win a whole lot of awards around environmental work and the like. And once you get into that environment, it's hard actually to get sad. It really is. It was full of purpose. It was full of hope. And as I went along, I increasingly started to attract the attention of a lot more Kiwis, farmers wanting to change their lives and make a transformational journey change themselves. The story I tell next is what I call the 4C story. A farmer would come to me and say, Doug, you've doubled the size of your property twice. You've not only doubled it, but you've increased the performance of virtually every dynamic of your business. I'd like to do that. Would you help me? And I say, yeah, I love helping people. It is part of my soul to share with people because that is what saved me. Just a small group of human beings working around me to reignite my sense of purpose, to connect with me and reignite my hope. And I'll say to this person, when are you going to start? And they'll look at me and say, oh, Doug, I'll start soon. But right now, I'm just not quite confident enough. And I say to them, so you're actually, looking at being confident. When you start something as big as doubling the size of your business, you think you're going to be confident before you start? That will never, ever happen. The person will look back at me and say, no, Doug, what I meant was you're not confident. No, I realise I won't be confident before I start. That's not the right word, is it? I've just got to develop a little bit more capability. I'll look at them and say, no, you'll never start. You'll never develop capability before you start. Capability is something that you develop on the way. There are 4 C's in a step change in life. The 4th C is confidence. The 3rd C is capability. What's the 1st C? And if I was standing in front of you, I'd be asking you all this, but I'm not. And so I'm going to tell you the first thing you've got to do is commit. Until you've made an emotional and mental commitment to something, nothing will happen. You'll just keep going round in circles. I've got a name for those sort of people. They call them round to it. So we go, get it done when I get round to it. Or I'm gonna do it tomorrow. People who want to make a great journey in their life commit. They say, Doug, today I'm going to commit. Can you help me? And I'll say, I'm right in there, brother. I'm right beside you or sister, whoever it is. I'm here to help you. As we commit, we need to have a big thought pattern. And I've talked about the geese in Scotland flying in the V. We need to set up a group to fly with because geese flying in a V get 71% more flying distance. Doug Avery's had more than 71% more flying distance from associating with capable people at the commitment stage. At the commitment stage, when you're making that commitment, you need to have people who can help you think about what you're going to face, people who can hold your hand, people who can say, I'm here with you when it goes tough, because it always gets tough. That's the difference between success and failure, is the people who are prepared to commit to a journey that they know is going to be tough, but they seek support and knowledge before they start. The first C is commitment. The second C is courage. Courage is one of the most important parts of the whole journey. I know nobody who's ever done anything major who started off with confidence or capability. They had to commit, and then you go through this time, which is the most challenging time of the whole lot. The time where you have to suck up the fear, where you have to cope with the challenge of the new process, the uncomfortableness of the journey that you're going on. And through that time, that is that emotional stress and challenge with the support of other people will push you out to develop capability. Remember, capability is the third C. Every single little bit of capability that you discover is learning. And learning is one of the great fruits of life. Every time a human being thinks, I've mastered something, you get this wonderful feeling of fulfillment. It's just like oxygen. It's so vital. And as those capabilities start developing from the courage stage, guess what? You start feeling confident. That's the order at which a set of work goes. So you end up rising to a challenge. Do you know what? My 5 years of depression were worth it. Were worth it. God, don't go there if you can help it, but it was worth it to wake me up to the opportunities that existed inside of this man, those deep-seated talents, author, storyteller, farmer, not an average farmer, a better than average farmer. Those talents were there, but the part that I lacked was the knowledge, the chemistry, the mental connectivity of all those things. When I was depressed, I ended up with no connections. I had no sense of purpose, and I had no hope. I was lucky enough that my beautiful wife tried to still love me, but I tried to push her away as well. So it's an interesting process. It's what I call the vulnerability pathway. When you finish that set of work and you get to the place where you're confident, there's this great aura of I've made it. But actually the road of life doesn't have a place called made it. It is a constant journey, like a rail journey across a great continent. At all points, there are different directions you can head. You can change the points here and the train will go a different way. A confidence zone turns into what I call a comfort zone. If you sit in a confidence zone for very long, eventually you'll be sitting there in what I call the comfort zone, which is you're in control of everything in your life. It's low risk, it's safe. But is it safe? In a world where change is happening beyond belief, the comfort zone becomes obsolete. Here is you just sitting there thinking, wow, look at this, I've done so well. But then you start to realize, no, it hasn't. I haven't. A 2-year-old, and we all know one, asks why about 11 times an hour. By the time a child's 6, they ask why twice. And by the time somebody's 16, they're telling us what they know. What is it with us human beings that we lose our sense of adventure? And then when we get to midlife, our lives have become what I call vanilla. Nothing looks as good as it used to be. And part of the reason is that somewhere before that, we think we've made it. I don't mean for everybody that's watching this to race on out there and double the size of their business. Maybe it's just improve your golf swing. Maybe it's to sit down and write a book, whatever it is. But neuroplasticity is calling for you constantly as you grow through your life to keep invigorating yourself with the good juices that flow to the happy part of your head. A journey through vulnerability, the definition of vulnerability is being prepared to go to a place where you can't control things, but you're still prepared to go anyway. If you're not prepared to make yourself vulnerable, you will not make a journey. Vulnerability is your friend. Surrounding yourself with people to make these journeys is the key. And when you step out of a comfort zone, you go to the courage zone. You'll lack confidence. You'll feel vulnerable. You'll have a sense of fear. Fear is a debilitating process which takes time to learn how to deal with. Forget everything and run is one of the things you can do, or face everything and rise. You'll be told by your close friends that whatever journey you're going on, you'll probably fail, because they actually feel uncomfortable that they see you stepping out of the comfort zone. But if you're supported and if you're growing, you won't be long before you are forced to develop capability on the new journey that you're on. Once you get on that new journey, that's when things start to really happen. You'll start to deal with the challenges and the problems that of this new journey. You'll be acquiring new skills, and you'll be extending away from your comfort zone to grow your total capability. That is the fertility that's needed to grow your mind. A growing mind will be one of the most golden things you can ever do. You go back to being like 2 again, asking lots of questions, not getting the answers you want to, seeking more. It's the excitement that gets me out of bed. At age 66, I'm as excited when I get out of bed now as I was when I was 18. And a major part of the driving of that is I have a clear vision how bad life was when I was broken. And the vulnerability pathway takes you through to a confidence zone, finding purpose, living your dreams, setting new goals, time for another set of 4. And that might sound tough, but your 4 C's are allowed to have the development of great new play. I'm a passionate advocate of having a sizable part of my life playing. I love fishing, I love mountain biking, and I love tramping the beautiful trips around New Zealand. So in a way, what happens to a lot of human beings is they allow themselves to become a Death Valley. They turn the rain off. They live there thinking, why won't my life work anymore? And the reason is they've stopped that wonderful sense of inquiry. Now, I'm always encouraging people to go out and have a crack, to do more, to climb higher, to lift further, whatever it is. And I get incredibly inspired by events like the Olympic Games, seeing some of the most amazing human beings go through their stuff. Sitting in my couch, I watch and I think, gosh, that was terrific. But what we don't see in our couches watching the television was the pain that each one of those people had to go through to lift themselves to the top of the world. And then they have that brief moment on the podium, and then that's over, and everyone's clapping, and they're great. And you know what? That's their confidence zone. And then they go back and they think, I'm going to retire from this now, and I'm going to go and do something else. Or they think, I'm going to Paris in a few years' time, and I won silver this time. I want to win gold next time. All of those things happen, but only the great ones will go home and say, well, I'm not going to compete in the shot put anymore because I've achieved what I wanted to do there. But my next golden idea is this, and they will move on to that. Because this little thing up here is alive and well. It's capable of growing and developing under the concepts of neuroplasticity for the entirety of your life. Why wouldn't you go and get that? Why is it? Why is what 2-year-olds ask. Why are we not asking why more as we go on? It's an interesting process. When you think about it, you might think, well, I've never had these opportunities offered to me. That's probably because your treasures are buried really deep. Nearly all the great minerals of the world are not just laying around on the surface. They were grabbed years ago. Your real treasures are often hidden deep, and they will nearly always take a real effort, a process of going out of your comfort zone to find them. A lot of whether you can find them or can't will depend on how you're wired. And the lovely thing that I want to tell you today is, and I'm a classic example, is I changed my wiring. It took a while to rewire this bit up here, but the wiring we put in is exciting. And the big road and the man that's talking to you today is to my prefrontal cortex. I have excitement galore on a daily basis. And so that will pretty much decide where you are, is whether you've got a resistant mindset or a resilient mindset. A resistant mindset will say, I don't want to take on any challenges. I'm just pretty happy to stay here. If you find you're not happy in a few years' time, remember I told you so. A resilient person embraces challenges. They say, what's the next challenge? Bring it on. I've had 2 hours of rest. Now I'm ready for the next one. A resistant mindset gives up early. I tried that and I got beaten. I'm not going to do it again. I've already exposed myself to all my friends, and they just said, he didn't achieve that. A resilient mindset persists after setbacks. A resistant people see effort as fruitless or worse. A resilient person sees effort as a pathway to mastery. Every single one of those medals at the Olympic Games have been won by a person who said, I can. A resistant people ignore negative feedback. They're just sick of it. Everyone's always been giving them negative feedback. They are like a big sitting duck out there, ready to be told, you're wasting your life. A resilient person sees criticism as a refinement of their excellence. It's a completely different mindset. A resistant person feels threatened by the success of others. A resilient person like me sees successful person as my fast track to where I want to go. Now, I've given a fair bit out there, and I think that at this stage, I would just love to answer some questions if I can. But before I go there, I've got one of the most important things I'm going to say all night. Sometimes, despite all of our efforts, we can still find the road to be dark and black and see no way through. Sometimes that can be just like a fortress around you. And I passionately advocate to people, if you ever feel like that, write on the mirror, if you're a woman with your lipstick, and if you're a man with your wife's lipstick, where you look every day, I am enough. Because there are simply times in human lives where that's our best. It's okay to say I'm not okay. It's fine to ring somebody, if you're a guy or a girl, and say, actually, at the moment, could you come and help me? I'm really, really struggling. Because those days when you do that could well be the day when you birth the next opportunity. And then there's a one-liner that I absolutely love that was taught to me by my youngest son, who is an ultra marathon runner. He qualified, his longest distance in 24 hours was 240.4 kilometers. Madness doesn't only persist with the father, it's spread on to the kids. He had to go through hell on earth to get himself to that. Far more failures than success. And through that time, he had this wonderful one-liner that he taught his father. He's in my V. Our 3 kids are in my V. And he said to me, Dad, you win or you learn. You only lose if you don't learn. You win or you learn. You only lose if you don't learn. So if you become a person like me, where learning is at my core, where losing is what I expect out of every effort that I do, because virtually no one gets it right the first time. But I've learned to be bloody persistent. So let's take some questions if we might. How's that sound?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Doug. That was I think you said to start where you didn't prepare anything, and I think with that, I'm never going to prepare anything again, because that was really amazing. So we've got some good questions coming in, but there's time now, and there will be some burning questions out there. There's hopefully been, I'm sure there's been a lot of people listening intently, so good opportunities for some questions anyway. But just, I suppose, to kick off, we've got quite a variety of questions here, but one I suppose to focus on here would be, if we've got someone close to us that, you know, we're a bit worried about, how do we get them to discover their talents and get on with it? And should we be trying to push people who are struggling out of their comfort zone?
The time to develop resilience and things like that is when you're well. So, you know, like the word resilience is quite hard. And so somebody's actually in a broken place, they need a lot of compassion, and they need to be calmed. And so it depends how far into that place they are. But, you know, just getting beside somebody, and I this is a technique that I use with somebody who's broken with myself. And I think I need an excellent question, whoever that was. Thank you. I call myself a storyteller. I swan around the place telling stories. We've all got stories to tell. When somebody arrives at my house, very few people will ring me and say, I'm broken. They'll nearly always say, can I come and see you? That's about the sum total of it. And the reason they feel comfortable to come to me is because they know I've been through that process. When they sit down with me, I'll say to them, tell me your current story. And away they go. And they start to spill. It's such an important part, and I've always been a poor listener, but my wife says I've improved 1,000%. In another 100 years, I'll be really good at listening. But it's one of the things that I've learned. You need to open them up to tell their story. That can take often 40 minutes of just absolutely going for it. When you turn the tap of a broken person on, they will really spill their story. When they start to slow down a bit, I say to them, and that often involves tears, that's fine. Listening is not a hard skill if you just remind yourself. So if you're fearful about approaching somebody, if you can just lance their boil a wee bit and let them spill their story. When they've been going for quite a while and slowing down, I say to them, that's your current story. It's quite sad. Tell me about your past story. And they'll go, like when I was happy, and I say, yeah, tell me about that. And they'll go straight into telling me about their past story. And you'll notice that they sort of sit up a bit more and they're feeling a little bit better. And then I take them to actually the journey that they need to take. And that is, I'll say to them, tell me about your future story. And they'll look at me and say, you know, like, where, you mean what I'm going to do in the future? And I say, you tell me about that. Where do you think you could be in 1 year's time? What would that look like? Tell me about what that would look like if everything, don't overthink it, but if everything went really well. And they'll say, like in 1 year from now, if everything goes well. I said, yeah. Because I said, that's the only way that I can help you. So if you're working with somebody and you can turn them around from seeing all things that have gone wrong in the past to lighting a candle in the future, that will start to switch on the hope button. The fact that they've connected with you, that they've downloaded with you, that will connect onto the hope button. The language that I use around about that is the future creates the present. When you can see where you want to be, you will start to put together a plan of how to get there. So a broken mind is spread all over the place. A person with depression, and I can remember feeling like this, has got thousands of thought patterns going on in their head at any given time, and yet it renders their hands useless. So the part about this journey is to slowly motivate that person back to actually part of an achievable journey. And sometimes that can be very small amount of stuff, but a human being that you restore hope in will be a human being that you can start to grow. Is that helpful?
Excellent. That's a good question and a really good answer, really strong answer. So the next one to move on a wee bit is, so it's into the comfort zone aspect. So we want to get out the comfort zone. Is there a risk that we can be out the comfort zone for too long? You know, is there a risk of burnout? Is there a reason to come back into the comfort zone from time to time just for a bit of a rest?
A confidence zone becomes a comfort zone, and every human being's journey is different. But what I see with a lot of people, so the bulk of my work, some people work with youth. I do some work with youth. Their emotional problems are often very, very different, often related around early love, broken love, and a failure to understand how they can fit into the world. Most of my work occurs between age 42 to 55. It's about 90% men and about 10% women. That's what I work with. And the bulk of the reason I've established that a lot of those people are in that place is that they've just stayed in the comfort zone too long. So the longer you're in a comfort zone, the harder it is to get out of. That passion, that asking why of a 2-year-old, we need to be stimulating each other to be interested and redeveloping and reinventing ourselves. I can't imagine what it was like to live in the dark ages, but that would have been like Death Valley for a guy like me. I am a person who needs stimulation on a regular basis to maintain my growth and my well-being.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Next one, moving on, there's a few, farming related questions, and I think it kind of goes back to a discussion we were having at the start of, before we started the meeting, looking at where we're at as a country at the moment. So we're post Brexit, not post COVID, but we're moving through. Obviously, trade deals and economic growth are a big thing. Where is, can you set the scene with where we're at in New Zealand with regards to farming and I suppose a world conquest and coming to take over the world, coming to sell all our lambs and put us all out of business? Can you put that one in context?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. When I toured through Scotland, I urged people to not look at New Zealand as a threat. And I know that some of you might be sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, here we go!" But I actually want to put the context to that. New Zealand is going through a major change, massive change. Since I toured Scotland, 77,500 hectares of New Zealand has gone into forestry. 34% of that into permanent carbon sink. Nearly all of that land is sheep and beef country. When I was a young man, there was 73 million sheep in New Zealand. It's dropping at about 1 million sheep a year. My wife and I have just sold the last of our shares in our farm to our son, and his first sale of land, it was actually dry hoggets actually, was the highest price by a country mile we've ever had. So that's at a time of year when normally prices are quite low. What I'm saying is that New Zealand is transitioning away from its traditional roots. We're moving away from working our butts off here to produce export earnings to buy oil into being more self-sufficient. We've got a big aluminium refinery in Southland, which is going to be decommissioned, and we're looking at producing hydrogen there for our transport fuels from our cheap hydroelectricity. We are on a journey that will not change regardless of who is the government. China has become, in the last few years, our major trading partner, and they can't get enough of our stuff. Our relationship with them is always a challenge, as it is with everybody. We're a tiny nation that gets squeezed in pretty much everything. Our agricultural minister has been in your country negotiating a trade deal. The reality is we don't have much surplus to sell, and we never, ever will again. You're probably sitting there in disbelief, but I want to give you that energy, that thought pattern. We've got large areas of our country we are shutting off that used to be extensive sheep country, not running very many, for conservation areas. The whole landscape of New Zealand is changing faster than you care to imagine. And so those of us that are left with sheep and beef as our prime source of income are going to get incredibly high prices for the foreseeable future, because here, one of the things I notice is that the rush to turn to vegan has turned the other way. A lot of people tried it. They found that didn't work well for them, and they're going back. The development of artificial meat was all over our supermarkets, and then it went on to being on special all the time. And the supermarkets that I shop in don't even stock it anymore, because actually at the end of the day, what our consumers are telling us, and what I believe is higher value products, and most people can't afford to eat New Zealand lamb here anymore, but those who still can, they don't want to buy something that was grown in a petri dish. I see farmers in England and Ireland and Wales and Scotland as brothers in arms. We face exactly the same challenges, but the historic challenges that we possibly created for you, I absolutely guarantee you will never exist again. The trade deal will be just a piece of paper of very little value to either side. The world faces protein shortages. My youngest son, our youngest son, is in Western Australia, the crazy runner. He currently has in his little company, he currently has 600 million Australian dollars worth of grain under his jurisdiction. It's he's their advisor and marketer, and his clients are getting seriously rich by the hour. Even though China said to them, "We don't want your stuff anymore," they just diverted their product to a different place, and that's what happened. So there's a global process going on, which is different, and I just think I should go on and say what leading New Zealand farmers are doing, and this is a whole variety of things, is you can't manage things if you don't measure things. So a farm and business like ours is jumping into measuring with technology like we never have before, so that we can manage outcomes, so that we can be in control. And New Zealand, another reason why we'll never cause you trouble is we've got a logistics supply chain crisis. We're way down here down under, and ships are just getting shipping organised in and out is just turning into an absolute nightmare. There are tractors all over New Zealand sitting idle because they've got one tiny piece that you can't get a part for. There's projects that we want to do that we can't do because we haven't got the bits. There are industries, apples falling on the ground because we've got no one. That's past now, but we didn't have the labour to pick them. Our freezing companies can't get enough labour to run full chains. Our unemployment rate is back to the same as it was before COVID started. We have lost the capacity to be that other person. So if I was a Scottish farmer after this thing, I'd get the hell out there today. I'd set some high goals. I'd kick myself into gear and I'd get on with it. And I'd ask myself, what is my new challenge? Where am I going to be in 12 months' time? How many goals can I kick between now and then that are going to make my family, my well-being, my mental health so much better than it's ever been before?
an amazing message. You know, it's great to hear positivity, and it's also amazing the commonality there. You know, we've a lot of farms getting planted, and certainly the same labour issues, the same COVID-related issues, and it's certainly the future has to be bright for red meat production. It has to be, the demand's there and the supply's not. So it's good. So if we keep that in mind, and I'm conscious of everyone's time, but I think there's so much value in this discussion, we'll maybe just run on another few minutes. But if we look at, so from a media perspective, social media, beyond meat marketing, you know, all that type of stuff, our industry gets a really hard time publicly, regularly scrutinized, and a lot of mistruths, or single-sided stories going out there. With that, there's a big issue with, you know, a loss of a sense of purpose, and farmers en masse getting pretty down about our industry and the future. What do we do? So we've all attended this meeting, we've heard you. What do we do to actually give the industry a kick in the arse and point out all those positives and keep people heading the right road?
Well, that's a great question too. We've just had a protest here in New Zealand. Our government's been driving a lot of changes, and the core of those changes to me are okay, some of them, but they, like all governments, they just want to do things with a broad stick, and they were coming that thick and fast that New Zealand farmers got left behind in that process, and there was a whole lot of things that were happening, and then it all exploded into what a small group of people called it a howl of a protest. So it was supposedly by our climate change ministry described as a group of Pākehā farmers who were stirring up trouble down south, turned into 100,000 farmers all over New Zealand, took to our cities on tractors. Like, we've never done anything like that before. I was out there, I had a signage, and I had hug a farmer, and I've never had so many hugs in my life. The streets of our towns were just clustered with people. We'd been told by our industry that people actually still love farmers, that 80% of people thought farmers were brilliant. That day, we all came to believe it. And there's a new sense of reality has occurred in New Zealand. We reminded ourselves of what we saw with COVID, when people were pushing their supermarket trolleys around the aisles, grabbing as much as they possibly could and pushing and shoving. The reality is that we are food producers, and we are needed, and we always will be. So to me, work with positive people. And I struggle at times. I get tangled up in the vitriol that comes from a very small percentage of our population here in New Zealand. I think that's been the greatest thing, that the articles that have been written here since the protest, bar two, have completely changed. And one of the writers of one of those negative articles, I sent her an email and I said to her, thank you so much for your article today. If we have to protest again, we'll get 400,000 people rather than 100,000. You've done the mustering for me. I think we all need to stick to our common belief that the work and the effort that we put in is meaningful. But we should never lose sight of the fact that we need to continue to seek higher levels of excellence, and we need to embrace change. And that's hard on your own. And so maybe a great place for me to finish today on is to go back to my goose story. Geese fly in a V. The reason they fly in the V is the aerodynamic effect of that V gives them 71% more flying distance. When you stand out in your field, and I remember being in the Orkney Islands and telling the Orkney people this, and one guy jumped up and he said, we shoot 65,000 of those bloody geese. When you stand out in your field and you listen to the geese flying over, you'll hear honking. That's the late geese honking up the one at the front. Keep flying, we're having a free ride. But the other honking, and the constructive honking, is the others in the group saying, is it my turn to fly the front? So as we progress into the future, we need to think about that goose story. Are we part of a local team or a group? Are we assembled and are we focused on the things that will really get us somewhere? Are we spending all day worrying about Kiwi farmers amped on by the guy from the car show? We hear about what he's been saying. He's all wrong. Ramsey, is it? No, not Gordon Ramsay. Who's the fella? It's about actually taking control of the reality of what you can do and doing it. Being one of those people that can just actually cope with being not a part of that ramble, because I don't believe that there's anything. If I could, I'd love to be in my son's shoes now. I think that he's going to go through a golden period of time in farming. It won't be exempt from challenge. The challenges will be different from the ones of the past. That is all part of actually becoming that human being that accepts that vulnerability as part of the way forward. That's the difference between having the resistant comfort zone kind of attitude, or the attitude that I can and I will, but I need to fly with friends. And that's worked so beautifully for me for 20 years. And if I go back to my pre-broken days, my biggest problem was I allowed those negative thoughts to dominate my thinking. I shut down my ability to reach out and take risks. And in the process of that, I became the greatest risk that I hope I ever was to myself. I lost my sense of love. I lost my sense of connection. I lost my purpose. And I lost my hope. So don't be like me. Do it the easy way. Make some great choices today to go out of your comfort zone. Go out there and kick the ball high. And if Scotland's supplying New Zealand with lamb in a few years' time because we've planted forest everywhere, I'll be a grateful consumer. I sometimes, when I go to the gym, I wear a T-shirt that has Scottish lamb written across here. People say to me, where the hell did you get that? And I say, from the people that are closest to me in the world.
Excellent. And the people that produce the best beef and lamb in the world also.
Probably.
Some of it. Hey, Doug, that's been amazing. Really, really good. There's actually a question at the end here, which is basically, I'm not going to ask it as a question, but there's a question there about the importance of travel and the importance of getting off farm. And all, I think, from the comments and the chat and various messages I've been getting, I think the summary is that the door is wide open for Doug Avery's return to Scotland when COVID allows, and when things open up again. It would be great to see you back over here and making a difference. There was also a really touching message about somebody mentioning the neuroplasticity and having heard you on the last webinar we did, and just the difference, the impact that's had on people, so or had on them individually. So I'm sure today, it's only an hour, but I'm sure for some, or for many, it will have been a very significant hour and very important for the rest of their life. So really grateful to have you with you, and can't thank you enough. Can't give you a hug, can't shake your hand, but we'll do it all virtually. We'll do it back.
We live. Like that's half the battle. Is if you think you live in if you think there's no hope, well, there will be none. There is as much opportunity out there now as there's ever been. It's just, have you got the eyes to see it? That was the one liner that changed my life.
Yeah, amazing. And what a way to end as well.